name. Amen. Do be seated. Matthew chapter 23, verses 13 to 39. Well, who are the baddies today? Well, it rather depends on what newspaper or online website you read. It might be the migrants who cross the channel on boats, or the heartless politicians who cram them into detention centres. It could be the climate change deniers, or the climate change activists. It might be the parents of the teens who hang around on our streets causing mischief, or the dog walkers who don't pick up their mess. It seems it doesn't take much sometimes to make people angry today. The one person we don't expect to see angry, of course, is Jesus. We know he ate and drank with people that others shunned. He healed, he helped, he turned away angry mobs, he touched the leper. And while we might struggle to do the same, that Jesus is the one with whom we are comfortable, familiar. And so this morning's reading comes as a little bit of a shock to us. Here's Jesus, but he's anything but gentle and comfortable. He's direct, accusatory, and he pulls no punches whatsoever. So what on earth is going on? Well, you remember that these verses come at the end of a whole section, a section that began with Jesus overturning the tables in the temple. He's been challenging the religious leadership of the nation. And more than that, he's been pronouncing God's judgment on them, represented by the withering of the fig tree. And that religious leadership has had a good go back, using some trick questions to try and make him lose the popular vote, or even wind up Rome. But Jesus has weathered it all. And now he makes his final response to the teachers of the law and the Pharisees in the form of these 7 woes. And it is very reminiscent of the way God spoke through his prophets in the Old Testament, Isaiah especially. Some of the very prophets the Pharisees are accused of ignoring. And Jesus makes his point in the things that he says, but also in the way in which he says them. So let's dig in. What are the issues? Well, in true Old Testament style, we've got a chiastic structure, which means the main issue is in the centre, with the other points radiating out around it, like ripples that form in a pond when you throw a stone in. And we'll work from the outside in. Verse 13. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. You build tombs for the prophets, verse 29, and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we'd lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started. The Pharisees, the teachers of the law, are the people whose job it is to lead others to God. Yet rather than listening to his word, that they might understand it better and teach others, they refuse to listen. They say we're nothing like the religious leaders of old. We wouldn't have killed the prophets. But they don't listen to Jesus, God's own son. In fact, as we know, they will go on to kill him. They're not interested in the truth. And because they aren't, they deny it to others as well. The next pairing is all about misplaced zeal. Verse 15, you travel over land and sea to win a single convert. When you've succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Verse 27, you are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. Now, the Pharisees, you see, are not lazy leaders. They're not the sort to slope off and play golf or to have long, boozy lunches. They are zealous and hard-working. They'll go long distances to convert someone to God. They'll make sacrifices in their own lives to follow the detail of the law, looking like they are the perfect believers. But the message they teach to the converts pushes them away from God, not towards him, because they teach a works-based faith. You've got to be good enough for God to love you. And to be good enough, you've got to do this and this and this and this and this. And of course, the converts often have enthusiasm and excitement, often are super keen. The converts they make are super keen in the wrong direction, perpetuating this false gospel. The image, you see, the Pharisees project is a bit like someone's social media page. All smiles and happy families. Looks great on the outside, but conceals the truth and the reality behind it. The Pharisees look perfect, but it's a dead perfection, covering up rotting flesh. It's an illusion. Woes 3 and 5 tackle the actual teaching. A teaching is distorted, focusing on detail at the expense of the big picture. In verses 16 to 22, they've been ranking the importance of different vows. If you make a vow by the temple, it's less binding than an oath made on the gold of the temple, and so on. Verse 25, Jesus uses the detailed instructions on the washing of a cup as a metaphor. And all of these things were extrapolations of the laws actually given to Moses. The additional laws, you see, were put there by different rabbis and teachers, trying to ensure that everybody really pleased God, tackling every possible circumstance and situation. But in so doing, missing the big picture. The vow sworn by anything of God's is a vow sworn in God's name and is so much more serious. Everything has got twisted and distorted. But the main punch comes in verse 23. You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. They've neglected the very heart of what it means to follow God, to love the things he loves, to form a character like his, which loves justice, mercy, faithfulness. They're doing the detail, but they're missing the big picture. And Jesus calls them back. But notice he doesn't tell them not to give their 10%. That business about the spices is actually one of the scriptural commands. Deuteronomy 14:22. Be sure to set aside a tenth of all that your fields produce each year. So this isn't one of their add-ons. This is one of God's laws. And Jesus says, do that, but also love justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Model God's character and obey his commands. Well, this all seems like a fair criticism of the Pharisees, and it is. But why is Jesus so upset about it? Well, the clue is found in the names that he uses for the Pharisees. First one is hypocrites. Now, this, as you probably know, comes from the Greek word for actor, and it refers to the masks that ancient Greek actors used to hold in front of their faces. hiding the real person behind the mask. Or the religious leaders mask their true selves with the front that they put on. But by doing so, they are masking God from people too. They're misrepresenting him, preventing people from seeing God as he truly is. And that's hugely serious, eternally serious. He also calls them blind guides. See, because they've got God all wrong, they can't possibly lead others to God. Instead, they lead people away and into danger. And he calls them snakes in verse 33. Well, not only can snakes bite and kill, but there's a hint of that very famous serpent back in Genesis 3. That serpent in the Garden of Eden, who led a certain couple astray so badly that they were thrown out of paradise. So the Pharisees are acting more like Satan than they are God. So no wonder he calls them children of hell in verse 15. It's strong language, isn't it? Shows you how Jesus views it all. I wonder if there are church leaders today who refuse to listen to God's word, who misdirect their zeal to matters that are nowhere near central to God's mission, and who distort the scriptures so that the plain message is obscured. Well, sadly, there are. And like the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, they can appear to be the good guys. Don't forget, the Pharisees were the good guys in the eyes of most people. They were the religious leaders. They were good and holy and pure. Jesus says you can look good and holy and pure on the outside, but lead people astray as effectively as if you were the devil himself. And so do pray for our church leaders today. Pray for them. The difficult job that they do, the temptations are great. And check your own attitudes as well. Each of us has to check our own. It's easy to point the finger at others, but do we ever do the same? Jesus really doesn't mince his words. But unlike the keyboard warriors who love to point the finger at anybody they disagree with, Jesus does not finish his woes with a flourish. There's nothing triumphant about this at all. In fact, quite the opposite. Verse 37 reveals Jesus' true feelings. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often have I longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. And you were not willing. Jesus is actually heartbroken over them. He wants nothing more to gather them up and keep them safe. But they won't let him. Like the parent of adult children, he can't compel them, much as he wishes he could. Because Jesus never forces himself on anyone. We have the freedom to come to him or not. But there will be consequences. Verse 38, look, your house is left you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And Jesus leaves. Chapter 24 begins with him walking away from the temple. And this is so much more than a simple historical note. It's a flashback to the day God's presence left the temple in Ezekiel chapter 10. See, the religious leaders have rejected Jesus, and he does not stay where he's not wanted. And this simple detail should fill us with more horror than any of the harsh words that Jesus has used. Because a rebuke from a loving parent stings at the time, but can bring about positive change. But absence is far harder to bear. How much more so the absence of God? Jesus walks away. There's nothing worse than that. And it's a great reminder to us not to make presumptions about Jesus, not to take his kindly presence for granted, but to come to him while we are able. Isaiah 55, verse 6, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. And it's a solemn message, but one we do need to hear. It could be so easy to read a chapter like Matthew 23 and just point the finger. Instead, we need to read it carefully. Ask God's Spirit to show us areas of our lives where we're falling short. And come to Jesus once again, allowing him to gather us under his loving wings, safe and protected forever. The word of prayer. Oh, Father, we thank you so much for the loving arms of Jesus. We thank you for his loving rebuke as a kindly parent challenging a child to go on the right path rather than the wrong one.